Race Selkirk will Quartet. War by other means 40 years, 10 months and 2 days after Longview. Politics is war by other means. Newt Gingrich. One of a Civil Guard station commander's perks was subsidized accommodation for himself and his family. Housing in the guard barracks was available for single troopers, but it was assumed that anyone who had risen to the rank of lieutenant would be married with children. If he wasn't, he'd better have a good explanation, such as being scarred for life in the face by acid. Although public discussion of homosexuality had disappeared from the NAR, to the point where many adults didn't even know what it was, one of the internal immune systems that had been carefully distilled into the Northwest's mores and mindset by the Ministry of Culture was a sub rosa but significant social stigma against anyone who remained unmarried and without children. In the NR, marriage was considered the normal condition of life for adult people. It wasn't legally mandated, but the social pressures were immense. They were seldom needed, since of course marriage was the normal condition of life in Aryan societies. One of the things the MOC had discovered early on was that it was actually very easy to gently, imperceptibly steer white people back into the way that their racial instincts told them things ought to be. For the duration of their tour of duty in Basin District, Bobby and Allura Campbell lived in a spacious 100-year-old bungalow-style brick house on a back road about a mile from the station. It had a large fenced yard with discreet electric rattlesnake, cougar, and thylacine barriers for their 3 children to play in, although a grizzly bear or a Sasquatch might present a problem should one ever wander out of the mountains. There was a triple car pad at the side of the house for levitational vehicles, and a satellite uplink on the roof with full encryption capability for Bobby's office, so he could work from home when required. Their son Clancy was 12 now, a tall and athletic boy. These days, until school started again in a couple of weeks, he spent most of his time herding his 2 beloved younger sisters around like a sheepdog. Catherine Campbell was 7 years old and insatiably curious about everything. She knew in no uncertain terms that she was to stay away from the family guns, but beyond that she had to be watched to make sure she didn't take needed household appliances apart to see what was inside. Morag was 3, and spent most of her day attempting to break the speed of sound around the house and the yard. "God, I'll be glad when she can start kindergarten," said Allura that night when Bobby 3 came in. Clancy took her out and let her just run up and down the road with the dog this afternoon, and it didn't slow her down one bit. She's still out there tearing up and down and wrestling with Dave. Through some arcane process Bobby 3 didn't understand, the elder girl Kathy had acquired the right to name the family's latest herd of animals when they had arrived in Basin, and she had been in an onomatopoeic mood. They now had Dave the dog, Carl the cat, Bill the bird, and Thomas the turtle, as well as Frank, Fred, Phyllis, and Felix the fish. Morag was in the backyard playing tug-of-war with Dave, a black Labrador, using an old towel, and the 2 of them were whirling over the landscape like dervishes. Bobby stuck his head out of the window and yelled, "Clancy, keep them away from the picnic table and the barbecue grill and make sure they don't knock anything over. I'm coming out and lighting up as soon as your grandfather and Uncle Tom and your cousins get here. When the full zoo arrives, we'll have to chase them out into the front yard or we won't be able to cook," said Allura. There was a beeping noise which told Allura and Bobby that a vehicle was descending onto their car pad outside. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was in fact 2 vehicles. Allie leaned out the window. "Clancy," she called out, "make sure the girls and the dog are away from the pad." The car pad had a fail-safe mechanism that would shut down and halt the descent automatically when someone stepped onto the metal tarmac, which was rather like a gigantic circuit board, and there were safety features on the cars themselves that would prevent them landing on human beings, but family policy required a quick roll call any time the landing alarm sounded. All were duly present and accounted for. Bobby 3 and Allura walked out and greeted his father and his mother, who were getting out of one large flying SUV, as well as his boss, Uncle Major Thomas Horikova, and Tom's wife Marie, with their brood of young maniacs, all up from Missoula for the weekend. Colonel Robert Campbell Jr.'s hair and beard were turning gray, and his erect body starting to fill out. He wore the wear and tear of years well, but it was there. At 53, Mulata Campbell was now the image of an old country grandmother. She embraced her son. Hi, Mom, he said. Nick and Ida couldn't make it. His sister and her Russian-born scientist husband lived in the national spaceport town of Centralia, Washington, along with their own 3 children. No, Nick had to work, Millie told him. Some rocket going up that couldn't leave the Earth's atmosphere without him. Millie went to hug Allura. Hey, Dad. Hey, Uncle Tom, said Bobby 3, shaking hands with both men. Thought we'd do some buffalo, burgers and boerewurst tonight. Northwest cookouts were much like the traditional American version, but the beer and the meat were cheaper, and sometimes a bit more exotic, like the South African farmer's sausage that had become popular in the Republic. Sounds good, said his father, who had become Big Bob over the years in order to distinguish him from his son. Better than Old Bob had been his verdict. The 4 Horokova kids ran into the backyard to play with their Campbell cousins. Allura and Millie and Marie followed them around the side of the house. Come on back when you're ready to start cooking, and we'll move the thundering herd out here so we can hear ourselves talk, called Allura. Bobby, I appreciate the invitation, but the fact is Tom and I would have been up here to see you about now anyway, his father told him. Tom needs to brief you on a few things. This comes from Olympia, PB level. There's something going on over the road, and it's not too savory. We may be hanging around for a while. Tom might be anyway. This is something we need to keep an eye on. The political bureau and a senior guardsman and a state security officer usually aren't a very good combination, replied Bobby 3 with a frown. Every time I see you 2 guys together on an official basis, it reminds me of that wretched Lost Creek business. This gonna get that hairy? Not immediately, said Tom. At least I don't think so. We would have come down to your office, but we have to assume that the Billings government and maybe others have eyes and ears in Basin, and we'd rather nobody over the road finds out that Boss is interested just yet. We'll let 'em think they've still got us fooled. Let's keep it informal for now. After supper, Marie and the kids will go on over to the guest house, and we can have a few quiet words. Later that night, the 3 men sat out on the porch. Marie and the Horokova children had taken one of the levitators to the guest house where they would be staying for the weekend, since the Campbell's current place wasn't really large enough to accommodate so many people overnight, even when couches and sleeping bags were pressed into service. Allie and Millie were inside putting the girls to bed, while Clancy was out back using an incinerator barrel to burn all the flammable detritus from the supper, plus anything else he could find to fuel the flames and satisfy youth's natural urge to destroy, although Bobby made sure he had a fire extinguisher handy. Keep an eye on the sparks. Starting a forest fire is not the best way to impress our new community here, he had sternly warned his son. The 3 of them leaned back, finishing off large glasses of draft Red Hook beer in Big Bob and Tom's case, and iced tea in Bobby's. So what's up? Our neighbors across the way over there in Boulder are going to be getting a visit soon, said Tom. A dusky African maiden bearing gifts, all the way from the New England Union no less, and it looks like she will have a few security consultants in her entourage she shouldn't have. One is an officer from the New Model Army. The other 2 appear to be undercover FBI agents. What? Exclaimed Bobby. You're kidding. NMA and Phoebes on the border, that's in violation of the armistice. An armistice from 28 years ago that never metamorphosed into an actual peace treaty, and whose provisions in some areas were always rather murky, said Colonel Campbell. The same old problem. Negotiating a formal and binding treaty requires that both parties acknowledge the other exists. The United States still insists that we are a blank spot on the map that suddenly fell off the face of the earth 40 years ago. It's a gray area. Technically speaking, the FBI is a criminal organization from our point of view, and they are not allowed in the demilitarized zone, but they do slip in and out on occasion for various nefarious purposes, and as long as they don't make a habit of it and they don't stick around, we usually don't make an issue of it. Who the hell is this negress and why the hell is she bringing Phoebes to Boulder, Montana? Asked Bobby 3. Here's where it gets complicated, Tom told him. Bear in mind that we don't know everything ourselves, and some of this is educated guesswork. The negress in question is named Gabrielle Martine. She's one of the carefully trained and educated ones from their small black elite they still present for token diversity, to maintain the pretense that those things are equal to people in some way. She's an assistant director with the United States Economic Recovery Administration out of Burlington, Vermont, which, as you know, is now the effective capital of the USA, Washington, D.C. is now a mostly symbolic, fortified enclave that has to be supplied by air because the roads are all out, and the overland route is too dangerous. due to marauding third worlders and general bandits. The ERA is planning on building what they call a CPZ, a community prosperity zone, over there in American Jefferson County. A what? Asked Bobby. A kind of big industrial park with all kinds of mostly high-tech and big-ticket industries, said Horokova. Scientific research labs, factories for pharmaceuticals and top-end electrical components, chemical processing plants, food processing plants, a plastics factory, a major internet server hub, also a couple of meatpacking plants for those parts of the United States where meat is legal now, and for the local farmers and ranchers. There will be agricultural stations, fertilizer and agricultural implement factories, everything they need to revive farming and livestock in American Montana into a profitable and productive industry. This will bring a lot of new people into the area, skilled technical and scientific and administrative types, who will be getting paid big new American bucks. They'll require housing, goods, and services, and so there are also plans on the drawing board for a couple of upscale malls with mighty marts, fancy fern bar restaurants, boutiques, the usual latte town appurtenances. Plus, these newcomers will need nice new EMS mansions to live in. So there will be a construction boom of the kind the American side hasn't seen for a long time, which will in turn generate more money and new residents, so forth and so on. Okay, I guess that's great news for the folks across the road, but why Jefferson County, of all places? Asked Bobby.
Therein lies the question, Tom said soberly. Somebody in Burlington wants to play chicken with the Republic?
They just decided they want to come up to the border highway and thumb their nose at us? Why? Inquired Bobby. It may seem that way at first glance, but in their madness is method. The intelligence eggheads and analysts and gamers at the circus and CMI have come up with a possible theory, and right now the PB thinks it's the most likely scenario. The theory is that the Americans and the East Canadians, who also seem to be involved, are gearing up for a Cold War. You remember that term from your history classes about the 20th century? Yeah, replied Bobby. I didn't think the United States was in any position to wage any kind of war against us, cold or hot. To their everlasting chagrin, no, they are not, replied Big Bob with a smile. We are the regional superpower. The only other nations on Earth with the military considered strong enough to take on the NDF are China and Russia. We've a long-standing and mutually beneficial entente with Moscow, and the Chinks steer clear of us. They got burned during the 7 weeks when they backed the Beaners down south and they lost a lot of pilots and copters and treasure. They won't throw good men and money after bad unless they have a serious reason, which so far hasn't been the case. They have all the rest of the world to play with. That may be changing, though we haven't detected any wily Oriental gentlemen involved in ERA activity yet. Rather the reverse. The Chinese don't want the United States or Europe to recover economically. I thought America pretty much fell to pieces after the 7 weeks, said Bobby 3. Hell, from what a couple of blockade runners who just came back from Minneapolis a few days ago told me. It's all they can do to keep their own cities from bursting open like a leper's boil and washing like a poison tide over the whole countryside. That's been the situation for quite some time, yes. But the American government is trying to change that, or at least figure out a way to deal with it when it happens, replied Tom seriously. This is going to take some explaining. You know that after the loss of the 7 Weeks' War and the death of Hunter Wallace, the United States, and to a lesser extent East Canada, pretty much imploded as powerful central governments? Imperial America was always based on force, ever since Abraham Lincoln called up 100,000 soldiers to kill and coerce other Americans. Then after we kicked America's ass, the DC regime lacked the police and military muscle to enforce their will on what part of the continent remained to them. Effective power devolved back to the state and local levels. Large parts of the United States reverted almost to a situation of the kind that existed prior to 1861, where state and local government ran everything for the benefit of their own communities, which was what the Founding Fathers originally intended back in 1789. Yeah, said Bobby with a nod. Basically, in scattered parts of the country where white people were still the majority and still more or less in charge, they were able to establish enclaves where the electricity still worked, the cops and fire department got paid, the roads got repaired, the hospitals still functioned, and there was still food on the grocery store shelves, at least local produce. The big energy conglomerates had mostly moved offshore by then to escape ONI's confiscatory taxation and nationalization, but they were still able to supply enough petroleum-based fuel to keep essential industries and transport rolling. Said Big Bob. In a weird kind of way, the 7 Weeks' War was actually the best thing that ever happened to rural and small-town America for generations. Massive military defeat and the collapse of the federal government finally got the bureaucrats and their political correctness off people's backs in rural Kansas and Kentucky and Wisconsin and so on, and folks in what they used to call flyover country were able to rebuild their lives to some degree. The niggers and the spics gravitated to the cities and stayed there, because that was where the welfare and the rum ration was. Not that some of the state and local governments weren't just as bad. What you have to bear in mind, Bobby, was that just as it always has been on this continent since 1492, race was the primary issue, said Tom. The essential question of whose land this is was never settled or even honestly discussed by the old order. Under ONI, most American cities became almost totally non-white and completely custodial. There is no industry, no commerce except the local Korean market, and nothing in the cities except feral niggers and beaners and wogs hanging around waiting to be fed, clothed, housed, and entertained by the white man. For generations now, the black and brown inhabitants of the cities have been given tax money to keep them doped up, stop them from rioting, and get them to keep their violence and their squalor away from the remaining white communities. The yellows and the turbans were given the franchise to profit by relieving the blacks and browns in the cities of all that government money in their capacity as ghetto merchants. That had already been the case for almost a century under the old liberal democracy, starting with the non-white neighborhoods in the cities, but by the time of the war, the white population had all fled to the few remaining secure cities with green zones, like Washington, D.C., or else they fled out into the countryside and the gated liberal latte towns like Ann Arbor, Charlottesville, Chapel Hill, Burlington, and so on. Gated being a polite circumlocution for fortified to keep the niggers and beaners away from the pale, quivering asses of the Jews and liberals who created the problem in the first place, growled Big Bob. You got it, Tom continued with a nod. The increasing sums of money needed to bribe the non-whites into quiescence were created by the Jews at the Federal Reserve, who simply fired up the printing presses. I'm sure Bob here recalls the incredible hyperinflation from that one time he went out there just before the war started. You guys remember my cover was operating as a butt-legger and a beef-legger? Bob asked them. I used to get paid for a few cartons of smokes or a couple of pounds of pork chops with $10,000 bills, and they were about to bring out a 50-grand bill before the war broke out. The system was wobbly, but it worked, and it maintained the pretense that something called the United States of America still existed, even if it was a truncated version, minus the Northwest and the Southwest, said Tom. Then came the military disaster of the 7 weeks, and for almost a generation after that, what was left of the old Judeo-liberal system fought like a trapped crocodile to stay alive. They've managed to do so just barely. 6 years ago, they finally managed to get rid of the dozen or so regional money zones and reestablish a single currency again, the new American dollar, throughout most of the remaining 41 states. or bits and pieces of states like East Montana and American Texas. But the problem of the quarantined cities, with their seething millions of hungry and angry non-whites, is still their overwhelming major issue. It may yet destroy them if they can't keep the lid on. They're having a hard time these days keeping up the pretense that it's not racial, said Big Bob. The mercenaries the Burlington regime has to hire for the new model army are almost all white or Asian, including a lot of really nasty Pakistanis. Now they're looking for an excuse to bring them right up here to our border. The question is why? All very interesting, but what does that have to do with a negress descending from Olympus by Lake Champlain and showering the palefaces in Boulder with jobs and money and goodies? Asked Bobby 3. This is a little more speculative, bearing in mind the reality of the American situation we've just discussed, and to a somewhat lesser extent the East Canadian sitch. Put yourself in their place. If you were their old order, and you wanted to hold on to power and not have the whole show blotted out by a massive eruption of mud-colored savages from multiple reservations around the country, what would you do? Asked Tom. Carpet bomb the cities, said Bobby immediately. It's absolutely essential from their regime's point of view, hell, from our point of view as well, that at long last something be done to redress the population imbalance between those who produce and those who do nothing but consume. Their system just can't take it anymore. Non-whites have been flowing into North America and breeding like rabbits for over a century now. They consume every available resource like locusts, faster than the white man can replace what they consume. Somehow or other, the white race in one final dying paroxysm has to make some kind of effort to get them the hell out of here. The people running what's left of the United States and Canada know that, said Tom. The circus has most of their homes and offices and recreational areas bugged, and they occasionally send us interesting transcripts of what American and Canadian politicians say to one another behind closed doors. There are two problems with that solution. One logistic and one political and spiritual from their point of view. First off, they no longer have the military power to simply go in and slaughter 400 million non-whites. Not enough troops, not enough planes, not enough bombs, and not enough poison gas or bioweapons, which in most cases they've forgotten how to make anyway. They can't use their nuclear arsenal, if for no other reason than most of it seems to be non-functional now. The missiles have corroded away in their silos, half of them are unmanned, and no one seems to know if any of them would even lift off, never mind hit their targets. Tom sighed and continued. The second reason the Americans and Canadians will never use force against the boiling cauldrons of mud that now constitute their urban areas is that it is morally unthinkable to them to finally be forced to deal with the perennial American problem of race through force majeure would constitute a complete and irrevocable admission on their part that Judeo-liberal democracy, secular humanism, and multiculturalism are wrong, that they are failed belief systems, and that everything that has happened on this continent since 1933 has been a horrific and appalling mistake that has come close to destroying the world. They will never ever do that. Racial equality, multiculturalism, philo-Semitism, and the Holocaust, the moral superiority of genteel, liberal, and Jewish elitists to everyone else on earth, Bobby, these things now constitute a full-blown religion to the dwindling number of wealthy and privileged people who run what used to be the Western world. That is one reason why they hate the Northwest Republic unto death and are still trying to destroy us, even as they themselves sink out of sight into the muck of their own crapulence. The last of the old liberal power elite would die rather than admit that they have been wrong for 2.5 centuries, ever since the first Boston Yankee abolitionist cranked out his first pamphlet back in the days of crinolines and laudanum. They may very well die, along with untold millions of others, when they keep on trying to solve the problem by applying a Band-Aid to the Black Death. Once more, put yourself in their place, Bobby. You're the ruling elite of a nation and a society that after over a century and a half of unspeakable abuse is at long last about to come to an end in blood and madness. How do you put Humpty Dumpty together again one more time, even if only for a few years, so it will last your own lifetime without you ever having to pay the bill which history will present? Which is all you care about. How do you accomplish that? Ruminated Bobby, knocking back the last of his iced tea. Well, I'd have to find some way to keep conditions in the cities stabilized. At least stop them from breeding like maggots on a piece of rotten meat. Maybe I'd sneakily dose their food and beverage rations with contraceptives and abortifacients to try and at least cut down on the endless rabbit-like multiplication. The United States government has actually been doing just that for some years now, Tom told him. That and the normal 50% urban infant mortality rate has managed to keep the dam from bursting completely in most cities. But it's not enough. Not only do WOG and nigger babies die young, few of them make it past their late 40s. So what we're looking at is huge concentrations of angry, uneducated, over-medicated, and bird-brained stupid shitskins in their teens, 20s, and 30s. They are at the height of their physical strength and capacity for violence, and there are 400 million of them, give or take. Damn, muttered Bobby. Obviously, from the Americans' point of view, all these niggers and beaners and wogs have to be kept sedated, or at least sedate. That means an endless stream of money, drugs, booze, and electronic and mechanical toys, which is a real drain on the shattered remains of the American economy, because when you give niggers money, they just piss it up against a wall, and when you give them toys, they just break them and cry for more. How long can any society keep on paying out that kind of extortion to a population group that produces nothing in return? But you say they've become too weak to fight, and I believe it. So our old American order needs to step up their game economically to make sure they can keep the goodies flowing and keep all the shitskins comatose and content. Exactly, said Tom. Okay. I begin to see the reason for these community prosperity zone thingamies. The American regime is harnessing the last literate and productive people on the continent with any kind of work ethic and intelligence. That is America's last remaining white techies and administrators and producers. They're being brought together and their resources pooled so they can start turning out enough nice shiny toys and goods with which to bribe niggers not to riot. Boy, if that ain't a blast from the past, concluded Bobby with a chuckle. Yes, that's true as far as it goes, said Tom, his voice serious. But there's a bigger picture. What do you think will happen if there is ever a major mud spill from the cities and millions of non-whites suddenly go marauding through the countryside in a tidal wave like fire ants, devouring and devastating everything in their path? Suppose these community prosperity zones were near enough to Milwaukee, or Philadelphia, or New York City, or Atlanta, or Chicago to be in their path. Again, bearing in mind that once such a breakout occurred, then neither the United States nor Canada has either sufficient military might or the political will to stop them by force. Bye-bye community prosperity, said Bobby with a grim chuckle. Bye-bye community, period. Exactly, agreed Tom in a grim tone, and bye-bye God knows how much of the world's rapidly dwindling white gene pool when the black and brown mobs break through the yuppies and techies' security. Fences, batter down their doors, and set fire to their homes with the wretched white victims inside. WPB analysts project that given the sheer overwhelming number of blacks involved, and the shortage along their line of march of the vast quantities of processed or raw foodstuffs necessary to feed millions of them, cannibalism will become part of each horde's internal subculture and will be quite a regular thing. Which is why they're trying to get these last islands of economic life and production out of the way of the mud flow, said Bobby III slowly.
Ah, comes the dawn,
chuckled his father. They're not going to put all of their eggs in one basket on our border, are they? Asked Bobby in surprise. Not all, no, Horikova told him. Our information is that they presently plan to conduct a significant demographic and economic reconcentration of the means of production and assets out of areas which may be threatened by what they euphemistically call urban disorder. Reconcentration to where? Asked Bobby. Jefferson County, Montana? Actually, only about 20% of the CPZ investment will be taking place along the border, here or in Canada, said Tom. 80% of these resources, pretty much the last resources America has, will be invested within the New England Union and up into the green zones in the Canadian Maritimes, which are still mostly white. They're highly Jewish as well, given all the Israelis who fled to Canada after the light unto the nations deflated like a whoopee cushion. But the green zones in Hamilton, St. John's, Moncton, Halifax, and Prince Edward Island are still livable, viable, and have the necessary plant and infrastructure for manufacturing. But the NAR border gets 20% of all these goodies Burlington is passing around? Queried Bobby. Correct, affirmed Tom. From northern Colorado on up into Alberta. If all goes as projected, within 10 years' time, the American and Canadian demilitarized zone will be home to a population of almost 30 million people. Assuming that population to be 85% Caucasian, which appears to be the plan, that would mean that a little under half of the white population of the North American continent outside the Republic will live within 100 miles of the border. I'm sorry, that still doesn't make sense to me, said Bobby. Think about it, said his father with a wry smile. It's actually damned brilliant. What happens when there is a major mud spill from the cities? That's when, not if. And the Muds realize there is food and liquor and electricity and white women in the demilitarized zone. And they start moving westward in a massive swarm toward East Montana, or toward western South Dakota or Nebraska or northern Colorado along the Wyoming border, or western Saskatchewan. We would have to intervene, said Bobby without hesitation. We obviously can't have millions of niggers and cholos slumping towards our country with mayhem in mind. We would have to stop them. And stop them before they even arrived on the border. Bobby's eyes widened in sudden comprehension. By George, I think he's got it, shouted Tom in his best Henry Higgins imitation, flipping the top off another bottle of Red Hook. Those sons of bitches, gasped Bobby, laughing out loud at the sheer effrontery of it. They've moving their good stuff and people here to shelter under the guns of the Northmen. They know they don't have the means or the balls to mow down wave after wave of marching monkoids, but we do. Those liberal turds plan on conning us into doing their dirty work for them, and then they can scream and sob and wail about wicked evil racists hurting and oppressing the poor little dark people, like they always do. Hell, they may even work it up into another so-called Holocaust. They do seem to be finally getting to know us, said Big Bob with a chuckle. In any case, if there is a really big and bloody mud spill, we would have to do something about the widespread devastation such an event would cause to the white Americans in their path, liberal or neoconservative dumbasses though they be. The whole purpose of the Northwest American Republic is to secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Most people think that we serve that function simply by existing as a homeland for our people, and of course that's the primary way we fulfill the 14 words. But whenever and wherever white people are in physical danger, then we have to act. As their protector, if there is any way possible we can do so. That's why we spent all those years getting the last whites out of France and South Africa. Yeah, I saw Mooney's list, said Tom with a smile. Great flick. But wait, there is more. Let's pick an example. Say this new warlord Kamal Muhammad in Minneapolis decides to chimp out, and he and his jihadis go charging through the north, woods, murdering and raping and desecrating churches in the name of Allah, and so forth. There would presumably be some resistance. Even those insipid Minnesota Swedes aren't that far gone, but it's not enough. Local forces aren't strong enough to fight the niggers off, and the United States government simply stands by wringing its hands as they have always done when white Americans have been butchered and victimized by blacks. So the NDF rolls in and whips Kamal and his fuzzy wuzzies down to a greasy spot. What's to prevent us nasty Northmen from sticking around and annexing the Dakotas and Minnesota? Okay, what would stop us from doing that? Asked Bobby slowly. And if the opportunity offers, shouldn't we take that chance? The Political Bureau has been debating that topic for years, and will probably keep on debating it for years more, replied Tom. It's become much more of a front-burner type discussion since this CPZ thing came up, and there's now a risk of escalating tensions on our American and Canadian borders which might someday provide that very kind of opportunity. You an expansionist or a pragmatist, young Robert? I never thought about politics in that way, said Bobby. You're a party member and a first-class citizen, his father reminded him. It's your duty to think about politics. Look, thanks for being too polite to mention the fact, but we all know I'm only a first class because of Allie, replied Bobby ruefully. Can't have the daughter of the nation's hubby a mere second, or even a grubby third like some kid just out of his national service, can we? Oh, rubbish, said his father. Even if you weren't married to Allura, you would have gotten your second by now, and your first if you'd really cracked in on it. You're what, now 33? Anybody can apply or be recommended for first-class citizenship after age 30. Bobby shrugged. Anyway, to answer your question, I know there's only one party and we can't allow factions and disunity and so on. Fine, we'll take all that as read. said Tom with a smile. Bobby furrowed his brow. I can see the point in President Brennan's pragmatism during the early years of the country's history, when things were a lot more precarious than they are now, when the very existence of our country was in doubt. And every day in which the sun set on that tricolor flag still up there in the sky was a day of victory. I also know that we exist primarily as a homeland to provide physical and moral safety for our people the world over. There has to be some place on earth where white people can live, and work, and keep what they earn, in order to marry and raise children without the fear of themselves or their kids being slaughtered by black beasts, and maintaining that someplace in existence has to trump pretty much everything else. To answer your question, I suppose I'm one of the many people in the Republic who have the idea somewhere in the back of our heads that one day we'll be strong enough to kick the door in and take it all back, all of the America that was once ours. That old sea to shining sea dream, the old manifest destiny thing that first brought Lewis and Clark to our country. Little did they know. It dies hard in all of us, said his father with a quiet nod. And with all due respect to the late President Morehouse, who I understand was a truly great man and whose leadership saved us, I damned well think we should have gotten more out of the 7 Weeks' War than we did, Bobby concluded. So do a lot of people. Northern California and most of Western Canada wasn't enough? Asked his father, amused. Not enough to justify me and Ida being made to hide off in the woods for all that time. Not enough for them to pay for making my mom afraid, said Bobby III with a scowl. I always understood Millie held up really well in the EFPS retreat, replied Tom in some surprise. Yes, Jenny always said Millie was an absolute rock, the greatest help she had during the whole time, said his father. She was afraid for you, Bobby III told his father. We all were. Remember, we had no idea where the hell you were or what had happened to you. Ah, replied Big Bob. Yes, I remember that much, and no, for that it's not enough, Bobby III went on. I think we should have demanded Saskatchewan and Manitoba, Utah, and the rest of Montana, and both Dakotas and every damned majority white state west of the Mississippi, said Bobby III. And we should have grabbed Alaska, too. Their people voted for independence. Red Morehouse promised we'd respect their decision, and we have. We have good relations with the sourdoughs, and sometimes good friends are better than fellow citizens who are nursing a grudge because they think they were forced into something they didn't want, his father replied. Yes, it's the old argument, said Tom with a sober nod. Morehouse didn't think we could hold any more than we took. I happen to think he was right, but others have disagreed ever since. Could we wander back in the general direction of the topic at hand? Asked Bobby. I'd like to go tuck my girls in before they fall asleep. Okay, all of this is long-term, big-picture stuff, said Tom. The Political Bureau has looked carefully at this CPZ on the border thing, and on the whole they are cautiously favorable, not least because events may give our country reason to intervene in the future, and maybe grab back some more of North America from the Hebes. We like the idea of more white people on our border, because we believe that over the years a kind of melding will be possible. Perhaps they think they will corrupt us with their luxury and their hedonism, the old American dream. That only works on white people who don't understand who and what is behind it and what signs to look for. We have faith in the equally corrupting effect of the iron dream on them. What we cannot have and won't allow, insofar as we can counteract it, is the presence of racial enemies on our border and a general remilitarization. They are going to claim they have to bring back the goons in the body armor to protect their newly prosperous communities from so-called urban unrest, meaning the niggers breaking out of their pens. That's certainly true as far as it goes. A good chunk of the world's last reserves of white talent, white assets, and white females of childbearing age are going to need protecting, but that's what we created the Republic for. Our long-term goal, Bobby, is to get the people who migrate to these new border zones to start looking northwest, not east, and not just for security. We need to make sure the population of these CPZs are as white as possible, and that overt racial enemies are kept out of positions of actual power. This business over in Boulder looks like some kind of test case or probe, said Big Bob. The era's projected prosperity zone is being placed in the charge of this Martine woman, who is Negroid, and whose presence is clearly a deliberate provocation. She is also bringing as ill-disguised aides and advisors at least one officer from the new model army, and at least 2 individuals who, whatever their cover says, are from the FBI. We can't allow them to get a permanent foothold over there. Plus, there is the consideration that in order for these white people to get what they want from their government, they will have to defer to a negress and concede power over their lives to her, which is what the Republic cannot allow as a matter of moral conscience. Not anywhere, not any time, if there is anything at all we can do about it. The destiny of the white race is ours alone to decide. White men don't take orders from she-boons, said Bobby 3. Yeah, I get that. But what exactly do we do about it? Just go across the border and whack them all. A little more subtle than that, Tom told him. Actually, a lot more subtle than that. I'm not sure yet what we're going to do about the situation. We need to see how it plays out. We need to find some way to remove the undesirables from the scene while not throwing a monkey wrench into the CPZ project as a whole. We need to make it clear to Burlington that while this CPZ on the border scheme is tentatively acceptable to the Republic, in view of the many good things it will bring to white people, it is to be a conspicuously white endeavor from the get-go, Tom told him. Colonel Campbell spoke up. Community prosperity for Jefferson County, Sci. Negresses in power, women's suits, FBI agents and mercenaries, non-white labor, Jews calling the shots from behind the curtain, no. Okay, we understand this is a big chain of events and that's not going to be possible all the time. We are at the beginning of what will most likely become the longest and most complex geopolitical and intelligence game the Northwest Republic has ever played, and we're still scoping out the board. What do you need me to do, Dad? Asked Bobby 3. We need you to run point on the intelligence angle, at least openly. They'll expect the local guard to be curious about what's going on, and they won't be surprised at your interest. Hopefully we can keep them in the dark about just how interested we are, and you can allow your Uncle Tom to remain in the background for now.
You met with your opposite number over there in Boulder yet? Asked Campbell the elder.
Sheriff Lomax? No, said Bobby. I've got the hotline phone, but I haven't used it so far, and neither has he. In my briefing with Captain M.C. Owen when I took over, he recommended I not make the first approach or ask for a meet unless something came up and there was a real need to do so. M.C. Owen got to know Lomax pretty well when he was in command here. He says Lomax is somebody we can work with so long as we always play it straight with him. But he likes his space, and he's suspicious of anything to do with us, which I suppose anybody who grew up on the border would be. If Lomax thinks we're trying to pump him for information or use him in any way, he'll probably cut me off and toss the hotline phone in the garbage. That will make it difficult, since that is kind of what we want you to do, ruminated Big Bob. Anything on your plate that might need any cross-border law enforcement liaison anytime soon? One of our local boys just out of the army is paying his attentions to a girl from over the road, said Bobby 3. She's the granddaughter of a real bitter-ender Union vet who's still fighting the First War and who's threatening to shoot our fellow on sight, plus Johnny is a blockade runner who regularly cruises through Jefferson County at a high rate of knots, so there might be some kind of incident building there. Other than that, no, I can't think of anything. I've got some snitches over there that MC Owen passed on to me, but they're on piecework rates. I'll see what I can find out about this nigger and her entourage, but you may have to up my intelligence budget. They'll take credits, but they prefer New American. You'll have to have a word with the Northwest Bank branch manager to raise the station's foreign currency allowance. I'll ship you the money direct via government mail, in case somebody at the bank is also in the freelance snitching business, said Tom. I'll get you 1,000 NA bucks in 10s and 20s this week to start with. After that, you'll need to give me something itemized. Allura stuck her head out the door. Whatever you 3 are involved in, it will have to wait, she commanded. Story time for 2 little girls. Bobby 3 got up. Sorry, he told them. Priority call,